Well, it's good to see you back again in this course in international business. We're working our way towards the end. This is Unit 7, Foreign Direct Investment. We want to look at some of the topics that we're going to be covering today. First we'll be defining what foreign direct investment is. We've sort of talked around this topic a little bit in some of our previous units, particularly about trade policy and trade theories. But we want to look at the trends and directions of foreign direct investment and discuss some of the theories of foreign direct investment and look at the costs and benefits of foreign direct investment, both to the home country and to the host country. And those relative names will become familiar to you as we proceed. The objectives for this unit is for you and me both to get much more familiar and recognize trends in foreign direct investment and describe some of the trends in those areas, and then understand how political ideology really informs foreign direct investment and understand the costs and benefits. And actually I have I think a nice story to tell you as we get going. But foreign direct investment, or what we call FDI, occurs when a firm invests directly in facilities to produce or market a good or service in a foreign country. Now, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce, FDI occurs whenever a U.S. citizen, an organization, or an affiliated group takes an interest of 10% or more in a foreign business entity. Once a firm undertakes FDI, it then becomes known as a multinational enterprise. I would like to tell you a quick story about that. In your textbook, you'll look at one of the cases about Volkswagen. I live in Chattanooga, and some years ago, Volkswagen announced that they were going to build a large manufacturing. In fact, it was the newest and most technologically advanced auto manufacturing facility in the world the day that it opened. It takes years to acquire the land, to work with the local government officials, to work out all the trade deals, to make sure that they have incentives in place and subsidies in place. And Volkswagen decided to build in some property in Hamilton County, which is right outside the city of Chattanooga. Now, this has been absolutely wonderful for the local community. It took several years to build, so it employed lots of builders. Obviously, they didn't bring German companies in here selling cement and steel and other things. The Germans came with their engineers to direct the building of the facility. But then once it was up and running, they employed directly about 2,000 workers. A lot of these were not available in the Chattanooga area, the skill of working in automobile manufacturing, because we didn't have that type of facility. We had other what I would call a lighter type of manufacturing, but not heavy manufacturing involved with automobiles. And consequently, those 2,000, many of them had to be sourced from someplace else. So they moved from another part of the United States into the Chattanooga area, which helped our real estate market. And then, in addition to the 2,000 direct hires, there were probably another, I don't know the exact number, probably between 8,000 and 10,000 indirect jobs created through suppliers. And you'll remember we talked earlier about Michael Porter and his theory, and these would be called related and supporting industries. Anytime you have a car manufacturer, they have to have their parts sourced from someplace else. And so many of those companies that supplied Volkswagen in Europe and other manufacturing facilities around the world moved some operations into the Chattanooga area. So it helped overall the entire employment picture in our area. They've been so successful that they now are producing a new SUV, and it's going to be produced there in the Chattanooga market as well. So we're looking forward to probably another 2,000 direct hires, and then not probably as many indirect hires, but it has helped our employment picture quite a bit. So in 2008 and moving forward, when we had the downturn in the economy, this business was just getting ready to come online, and so Chattanooga sort of was bypassed. So this is a real firm local example of foreign direct investment. So again, foreign direct investment occurs when businesses invest directly in either production or marketing facilities in a foreign country. So Volkswagen is a German headquartered company. They selected a physical location, some land. They negotiated with the city county for the purchase of that land, and there were some trade-offs given. In some cases that was criticized a little bit, but I think the amount of taxes that they pay and the number of jobs that they've created and the resulting economic activity is more than compensated for the good price that they received on the land. So So this is an example of a company working, a foreign company investing directly, and we'll see exactly what kind of investment that was in just a few minutes. But it has been wonderful for our economy. Well, this happens around the world on a continuing basis. And historically, we've looked at developed countries buying land cheap, looking for cheap sources of labor, cheap raw materials in foreign countries. But the United States, labor is not cheap. Raw materials are not cheap. Why did they do that? They wanted access to a market, and they knew that they could sell a lot of Volkswagens in the United States. Now, not all of those are consumed locally. Many of those are also exported and shipped abroad. So this unit really is talking about foreign direct investment. It describes the process of foreign direct investment as well as the costs and benefits of foreign direct investment. So how does foreign direct investment impact and affect the world economy? I just gave you a very clear example about how it affected one piece of the economy in Southeast Tennessee. But when we discuss foreign direct investment, it's important to distinguish between the flow of FDI and also the stock of FDI. And the flow of foreign direct investment refers to the amount of FDI in a given time frame. Generally speaking, it's 1 year. And the stock of FDI refers to the cumulative value of foreign-owned assets at a given time. And then we also have to talk about flows, and they are both out of a country and into a country. And we'll see that as we continue through this unit. To begin with, we want to look at some trends in foreign direct investment. Both flow and stock of FDI increased significantly during the past 35 years. And a lot of that, as we've seen in previous units, has been due to either the reduction or the elimination of trade barriers. And we saw what some of those trade barriers have been. We've defined them in previous units. So as those things as barriers have been reduced or eliminated, it's opened the door for a lot of foreign direct investment. And there's been a lot of rapid growth in foreign direct investment, primarily because businesses don't like protectionism. And their political and economic changes in developing nations have made it possible for foreign direct investment. And then this whole notion of globalization. And we talked about that in the very first unit. And we said not everybody's in favor of globalization. And I ask you to begin to think about your attitude towards globalization. What are the gains to be made with globalization? What are some of the negatives? It's not all positive. But globalization has had generally a positive effect on the volume of foreign direct investment. Businesses now see the whole world as their market, and therefore they need production facilities close to their major consumers. So we want to talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go through this unit. And what about the direction of foreign direct investment? Historically, foreign direct investment has been an outflow from developed nations to developing nations. However, during the 1980s and the 1990s, the USA became a favorite target for FDI inflows. And primarily that's because we have a large and rich domestic market. We have more purchasing power than just about any country in the world, and we have a large population base with good incomes. Regardless of what you hear in the news about how bad everything is, we're still a target. The United States is still a target because we have a large and rich domestic market. Companies want to be here. They want to sell their products, and it's cost effective to be close to your customers. Also, the U.S. has a dynamic and a very stable economy. And again, don't listen to the news reports. Don't listen to some of the news coming out of Washington, D.C. It sounds terrible, but the U.S. is still the best game in town. We're still the best bet for attracting international investment, foreign direct investment. And we have a favorable political environment. Many places in the world, it might be inexpensive. You might have low cost of labor, low cost of raw materials, but then you find out when you are in that location, the political climate, the political environment is very unfavorable to business. It may be unstable. Can you imagine if you had an investment in Venezuela today with all that's going on there, or some other countries that are more volatile in Latin America or some areas of the Middle East? It becomes much more tenuous for businesses to operate in those areas. Consequently, they tend not to make those investments in unstable areas. The U.S. has the most favorable political environment in the world, and therefore companies flock here with their dollars or their euros or their yens or whatever to make investments in my backyard and your backyard. And the U.S. has an open attitude towards foreign direct investment. In the illustration I gave about Volkswagen, they were welcomed with open arms because we knew if they were successful in producing and marketing their vehicles, what the impact economically would be for Chattanooga. They've been very good corporate citizens. They have plans and programs in place to support local schools and other types of political implications of their foreign direct investment. What about foreign direct investment in developing and transitioning markets? Well, this is where the largest share of foreign direct investment goes. Developing nations still have an abundance of land, they have an abundance of resources, they have an abundance of unskilled but inexpensive labor. They will become skilled over time. And then you have, from the developing nations, we move into the transition economies of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. There have been significant increases in foreign direct investments in those countries. I mentioned in a previous session that I do some work in Europe. I've spent a considerable amount of time over the past few years in Central Eastern Europe, which were former Soviet bloc countries, the Czech Republic, Slovakia. And I can tell you, just by taking buses and trains between cities and seeing all the manufacturing that's taking place over there, you have major automobile manufacturers, the French, certainly the Germans, and the Koreans and the Japanese are building automobiles in those countries. They're building it because of some of the previous comments we made about stability and so forth, but also because of distribution. If you go into Central and Eastern Europe, you have a tremendous market of people. And so people, companies that are in the business of manufacturing products want to have those products close to their base of customers. And so that's one of the reasons that you see a lot of that in some of those countries. In the city of Prague, the Czech Republic, which has about 1.3 million people, if you look at the landscape, or the cityscape I should say, you'll see the names of all the major global players, all the major global companies. They have offices, and in some cases headquarter offices, European headquarters in the Czech Republic. So the transition economies of Eastern Europe, the former Soviet Union, are rich environments for foreign direct investment, for companies to locate there. And then you have a recent inflow involved foreign direct investment in the emerging economies of Southeast Asia. Earlier in one of the units, we mentioned that most of the textiles, most of the clothing that we buy here in the United States is not made here. In fact, Vietnam has become sort of a haven for clothing and for the sewing industry, as have others. And so you see a lot of companies going there and making investments, not just importing and exporting and licensing, but actually making solid investments in those countries. And then finally, Latin America, and within Latin America, Brazil is the most noteworthy country as far as the top recipient for foreign direct investment. Now they've got political situations there, and they've got some uncomfortable issues, but that has not allayed or kept businesses from making investments in those countries. What about the source of foreign direct investment? We talked about where it goes, but what about where does it come from? Since World War II, the U.S. has consistently been the largest source of FDI, and a lot of people say, "Well, what are the big international companies that operate in the United States?" Well, I gave you the example of Volkswagen, but you can probably look in different areas, particularly in the Southeast. Bosch is here, Mercedes in Alabama, Kia, Toyota's in Tennessee, Toyota's in Mississippi. I think Nissan is in certainly a big part of western part of Tennessee. And so we have attracted a large amount of foreign direct investments, but it's not isolated just in the South. We have it everywhere. But other countries include the UK, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Japan. 60% of the outflows from 1998 to 2012. So we see that these are all sources of FDI. And what's the form of FDI? And I said I would mention this in a moment. When Volkswagen acquired land, and I say acquired because they didn't buy it at fair market value. There was a deal made so that Volkswagen could take possession of this physical land and build a factory. But there are two primary forms of foreign direct investment, and one is a greenfield, and that's where you establish a new operation in a foreign country. The easy way to remember this is there's a green field, and you buy the field, and you build a factory, and you install the equipment, and you as a company hire and train all your workers. Now, the downside of this is it's very expensive, it's very time consuming, and it's very risky. Imagine if you had a greenfield investment, again in Venezuela, and the government comes in and confiscates your property, or they tell you you can't operate there. Well, you've lost your money, you've lost your time, and you've lost your access to your markets there. So greenfield, while being very good, is an expensive, time-consuming, and risky proposition. However, it goes back to that old theory of risk-reward relationship. There's high risk, but there's a potential for much higher reward. If you don't risk very much, then the reward is not going to be nearly as much. And then you have mergers and acquisitions. And one of the reasons for mergers and acquisitions, it's much quicker, it's a lot cheaper, but you can acquire a lot of valuable strategic assets that come with an existing business. One is you have brand loyalty. The customer base already knows the brand, and you have customer relationships as well as the production and distribution systems in place. So if you merge or acquire an existing company, usually your production facilities, your warehousing, your systems of distribution are already in place, and all you have to do is come in and make yourself known there. And then you have the existence of trademarks and patents. So in terms of forms of FDI, we've got those two primary forms. And don't forget the greenfield and also the mergers and acquisitions. There are some theories about foreign direct investment as well, having to do with whether you export or license, because FDI, again, is expensive, it's time consuming, it's risky. But what about just exporting? What about just issuing a license and going into business and that way as opposed to FDI? But there's some limitations, and usually they have to do with producing domestically and then shipping abroad. That's timely, a time consumption. It's also very expensive to ship. It's better in most industries to manufacture close to your market base. And then what about licensing and some of the limitations? Well, granting a foreign entity or a licensee the right to produce and sell a business's products in exchange for royalty or fee on each unit sold is a good thing. It can be a money-making thing, but it can also be very risky, because now you're sharing some of your intellectual property. You're sharing, for example, your trademarks, your patents, your manufacturing methods, some things that may be proprietary to you. You're sharing those with your foreign licensee partner, and you become very vulnerable. And so many people, many businesses shy away from this type of investment in favor of a foreign direct investment. I think the issue here with licensing and limitations has to do with the level of control that a company wishes to maintain over all of its processes and the way that they do business.